For this week's project, I want you to use an axial, radial, and a dimensional layout for your posters. Now, in my typography class, we cover these different kinds of grid layouts in detail. But for this particular video, I want to just give you a refresher, and if you've never been exposed to this, give you some good examples of what I'm looking for and what I mean. This is why it says typography at the bottom. I'm simply using this as a reminder for everything from that class. So the three different layouts of using these kinds of grids are different because you're not using your traditional straight across and up and down style grid. Instead, for things like an axial radius, you've got one strong axis along your page in which all of the major elements flow across and pivot on. So in this case, you'll have one axis. Depending on where it is, you can lay out or change up your design, but it still has a hierarchy of one strong main element and all of the supporting elements and visuals that go along with it. Axial radiuses don't have to be just a single line, and they don't have to be just straight up and down or even across. You can have a variety of styles of line, and the way you lay out your content should respond to the direction of that axis. So if you do have something that's vertical, you can have things on the left and right and have it in a traditional style. If you wanted to go for something a little bit more dynamic, you can break up your line, or you can have your line going off at an angle, and then all of the elements respond to that angle. So here's some great examples of those different angles used with text in the layout of it. Again, when you lay this out, it's meant to break up in the visual elements. It's meant to make it a little bit more interesting and engaging, but you still should be able to read and understand what the poster is about. In this case, you can see you can also use margins and have everything align to that particular margin. Still axial. Everything is still nice and balanced as well. You've got all of the information, but you've got a strong, striking visual field on the other side too. Here's one done by Zurich Mahler. In this case, the axial falls upon the one, and all the information either falls on the axis or crosses the axis along with it. He took it, and when you divide up your page, you can use the rule of thirds, or you can use a golden mean, or you can use a phi ratio. And here's the axial radius for this one. So this works really well for laying out the typographic elements, as well as any strong visual elements that can support your axis. You don't always have to show exactly what your axis should look like, but it should be able to give you an idea of how it's done. A radial axis, on the other hand, has a central point in which all the information radiates from that point, and it's using that point to set up the grid structure for everything that flows with it. These are a lot of fun to be able to place in there. Sometimes they're a little bit more challenging to read simply because you're having to rotate and constantly change your position for reading, your field of view. However, they do add a great way of adding a strong central movement to your design as well. So you can see in all of these examples, they either found an image or they created an image that has that strong radial movement from a central point and then moving outward from there. As with any other typographic system, you still want to have a good strong hierarchy. You want to have one thing being the most dominant, and that's largest, or that's called out, or that has some sort of a different element, and everything else can be secondary to that. In this one, you can see how they've used the visual imagery of the shoe, and then they've chosen an appropriate typeface and have all the words and all the information going around it. Now, not everything has to radiate from here. In this case, you can see some of the other subordinate information is still left down in the bottom margin to be set off. But the main visual attractor is still radiating from that central point. Again, I'm going to go through these quickly just to give you a good idea of how things can be laid out. You can have elements overlap one another. Actually, that's some of the fun things about this particular style, is when you have things overlapping but still being able to be read and understood. Another way of doing this from an axial standpoint is you can have words curve and curve along and follow a central axis. Don't think that it has to be just a central point moving outward. As they move outward, they're still following and curving along the same curvature of that point too. And a final way that you can lay out your text is using a dimensional axis. For a dimensional axis, this is simply giving you the illusion that there is a three-dimensional feel to the text or to the imagery that you have. So they do this by adding some sort of vanishing point to the text or by having things overlap one another. In this case, you can see the strong vanishing point for the text that also fits within the imagery that's inside of the layout. Again, good strong vanishing point, follows along with the road, follows along with the buildings, and you can play around with different kinds of vanishing points and different kinds of camera angles. All of this can be dictated based on the imagery that you have. Another great way of incorporating dimensional feel is by having things overlap one another. In this case, there is a vanishing point for the room, but they've also got a picture element as if he's going into the room or going inside of it. Versus this one, you have elements that are on top of and flowing in and out of your style and your design. Some are a little bit easier to use than others, but these work really, really good, and they're a great way of adding some visual interest and movement to an otherwise flat design. The thing to remember about dimensional typography is that you still want it to be readable. You don't want it to be so obscured or so in perspective that you can't pick up on all of the information that they're trying to read. You want to be able to read and see everything. So I hope this gives you some good ideas for how you can lay out your poster. You can Google this, and these are different typographic systems that are used in the past. But I want to see you use these three and the three different posters that you're going to design for us this week.